All right, I think we can start. Right, Christian? Good afternoon. Yes, thank you, Christian. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the last session of the 2 days of this conference. It is really for me a pleasure to join you for today with this distinguished panel discussing aligning finance, equity, and climate action, a topic that lies at the very heart of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund's mission. My name is Tanya Liu, and I am the Conservation Finance Program Manager at the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, CBF. As I mentioned, this is the last panel for today, and we have already heard from great experts on the topic of blue economy, on debt for nature swaps, and other finance mechanisms. For the panel of today, we will also hear from one conservation trust fund and 2 other organizations working in the field in the Caribbean. As we face mounting global challenges, biodiversity loss, climate vulnerability, climate change, and especially in the context of small island developing states in the Caribbean, the strategic role of conservation trust funds and environmental organizations has never been more critical. We are not only financial instruments, but we are implementing partners, we're innovation incubators, and we're community connectors. And today's panel will explore how we can effectively align programming with global biodiversity framework and other international commitments, serving as a bridge between global ambition and local action. We will examine the relevance of sustainable blue value chains and looking at equitable conservation-aligned trade models and how they can drive both economic empowerment, especially linkages with the private sector, and environmental stewardship in coastal communities. And I'm delighted to hear from this panel and introduce them and to unpack some of these challenges that are related to strategic alignment, equity, biodiversity, and climate change. So really hearing from those in the field right now in this panel who have been implementing some of these mechanisms and these frameworks that we've been discussing earlier today. So for me, a pleasure to introduce the panel first. I'll start with Amy Jones from the Mesoamerican Reef Fund, MAR Fund in short. Amy has extensive experience in business development and product management. And since 2023, she's been leveraging her expertise to make a broader environmental impact as she leads the MAR Fund program called MAR Plus Invest Initiative to advance marine conservation through innovative blended finance solutions. This initiative convenes a partnership of regional experts to mobilize private capital into the blue economy of the MAR region, the Mesoamerican region. She also serves as the coordinator of the Mesoamerican Reef Technical Assistance Facility, where she supports reef-positive market initiatives and enterprises across the Mesoamerican Reef region. My next panel is James Crockett. He is the program manager for sustainable tourism at the Caribbean Flora and Fauna. James is, in his capacity, he supports the conservation and restoration of Caribbean biodiversity through assisting local partners such as NGOs and CBOs assessing opportunities for and the development of types of locally owned and managed tourism experiences that support sustainable finance strategies for conservation. Presently, James is also focused upon the development of innovative finance mechanisms to support private sector investment in nature-based solutions for climate change reduction and the development of a sustainable value chain for the valorization of sargassum seaweed for watershed restoration and also providing local livelihood empowerment. And third but last not, I have Linda as a panelist, Linda Breukers from Fuse Caribbean. Linda is a Dutch expert based in Latin America since 2009 and has worked in solid waste and circular economy since 2014. Over the past 4 years, she has collaborated with international organizations such as the World Bank, the IDB, GIZ, and UNEP as a financial waste management specialist at the UNEP's Zero Waste in the Caribbean project, She developed financing solutions for waste management. She is also a special convoy for Holland's Circular Hotspot. Currently, Linda works in business development at Fuse Caribbean, promoting green tech for plastic waste. With this introduction, I'm going to go straight into the panel discussion. We first have one round of questions for each of the panelists. And after, depending on the questions that we have received, we will open up and see if we can respond to some of the questions in the Q&A. So a couple of house rules. First, there is a Q&A chat or a Q&A box. So if you look down at the Zoom link, you should see that. So anyone can actually just pose the questions, and we can then take those questions during the Q&A. There is also interpretation in French and Spanish. So again, if you click below, if you don't see it, there are 3 dots. And if you click on the 3 dots, you'll see interpretation as one of them. And then you can select the simultaneous translation into Spanish or French if that is needed. And with that, I'm going to go then to my first panelist and the first round of discussions. Amy, if you can maybe explain to us what MAR Fund has been doing on innovative mechanisms, the vehicles that you have been implemented to ensure involvement of private sector in conservation efforts. So the floor is yours, Amy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanya. And thank you, CBF, for this kind invitation to participate in this webinar. As Tanya was saying at the beginning, well, MAR Fund is a conservation trust fund which aims to protect the Mesoamerican reef. The Mesoamerican reef, if you don't know, is spanning over 4 different countries, so between Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. So MAR Fund traditionally has been working as a conservation trust fund, working with conservation projects, with grants, for example. But more recently, we've understood the importance of also working with the private sector and companies, right, in the region, especially as we try to reduce the main threats of the region. For example, the biggest threats for this region are climate change, overfishing, and the lack of wastewater treatment. However, working with the private sector is not the same as for traditional conservation trust funds, right? It's not just philanthropic funding. So we really have to try and find ways to be innovative and try to bring in this private capital to support companies that may have a positive impact for the region. And working with investments, typical investors might be looking at, fast return, large ticket sizes. They're interested, in these, let's say, a minimum of 50,000 USD as a first investment. But what we're working with in the region, which is mostly local, small-scale initiatives with maybe smaller impact locally, regionally, it's not that attractive. So we have to come up with these new ways of making it interesting and appealing to an investor. So the ticket sizes are smaller, the risks are maybe higher, and the impact or the return that you'll see on the investment is long-term, right? It's not as quick as you would hope for. So MAR Fund has started an initiative that is called the MAR Positive Invest Initiative. And the idea is to create these new mechanisms and work with specific partners, experts in impact investment, to channel in some more private funding. So, for example, as we've seen that the risks are usually a bit higher, we've created a guarantee fund specific for the Mesoamerican reef region and for reef positive businesses. So if we have an investor interested in a specific business that's proven in our criteria to have a positive impact on the reef, we can de-risk that investment by saying, look, we have a specific guarantee fund to de-risk your investment in the region. We strongly believe in the investment, but still we understand that for a traditional investor might not be, they might not have that insurance, right? We're also trying different mechanisms, such as concessional loans. So concessional loan is a bit different to a standard loan where the interest rate will be a bit lower, for the lender, no, the loaner, sorry. So the idea is that we're mixing philanthropic money with private capital, and that allows us to bring down that percentage, right? So it's more interesting for the company that's going to be borrowing the money. And with that concessional loan that we're providing, we will ask for some commitments to impact. For example, we can ask that they include a specific number of women in their operations. We can ask that they provide us with some impact data, so environmental data that we want to see over time. And so these are some of the new innovative ways that a conservation trust fund can start to work with the private sector and to channel in some of that private capital that's available.
All right, great. Thanks, Amy. And I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. I have written down some questions.
Okay.
So again, for anyone who just joined, we're happy to respond to questions. So please post the questions. If you go down at the Zoom link, you'll see a Q&A box. And that is where you can include your questions. So we're happy to have them after this first round. We're at the first round still. So I have James Kroiket next. James, so building on what we just discussed with Amy about, I would say, private sector, but also the catalytic investment that we would need for conservation in the space in the Caribbean. Can you maybe just highlight a bit of your experience of flora and fauna on the biggest, I would say, most pressing opportunities in these blue economy value chains, as we call it? Over to you, James. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, I'm really going to be speaking with you from sort of a high level to start with, just to try and put things in context, because I think the need here is to bring in significantly more capital into this space. I think if we're looking to try and fund all of this restoration and conservation work through our trust funds and grant making from statutory grants, etc., we're not going to manage to achieve our goals. And just to give some basic stats of what the issue is, there's only a tiny fraction of global investment that goes into natural capital. The WEF in 2021 stated that 0.1% of global GDP was invested into nature-based solutions and natural capital projects. That is tiny. And then UNEP in the same year announced that total is actually 200 billion, but we need to be more like 500 to 700 billion per year. In comparison, in 2022, $7 trillion was invested in net nature negative investments. So there's 30 times more money going into net negative investments to nature than there is in nature-based solutions. So this is obviously not sustainable. And of the money that is going into natural capital, only 18% of that is from the private sector. So there is this huge disconnection here between where all the capital actually is in the private sector, especially after COVID. So many governments are cash poor, but the private sector, private capital is bigger than ever. So we've really got a major need to flip this. And I think the biggest challenge we've got is nature is considered an externality on company balance sheets, and we need to do something to change this. It's not accounted for. So one of the areas that we're exploring at the moment is to support initiatives like the Nature on the Balance Sheet initiative, which will be crucial for our region to implement a roadmap to make private sector investment into nature restoration and conservation viable. And I believe as a sector, we would do well to pool our resources and try to act as catalytic and leverage sources to get this private capital into nature conservation. One of my favorite quotes is by Stephen Jay Gould, and it's that we cannot win this battle to save species and environments without forging an emotional bond between ourselves and nature as well. For we will not fight to save what we do not love. This is a quote that has driven me for decades. In the same way, however, if our natural systems are to avoid the tragedy of the commons, we must also add nature to the balance sheet, for the markets will not invest in what we do not give a monetary value. So we really need to find a way of driving this private money into the sector. And I take a lot of encouragement from things like the Blue Forest Foundation in the Western United States, who are coming up with forest resilience bonds. And this is where they do a lot of work bringing private sector stakeholders and public sector stakeholders together to find a way of creating a bond to invest in forest sustainability in terms of wildfire and water management. And there's a model there in our region for us to work with. It takes a lot of effort up front to match these different parties with different interests together. But if we have an overarching umbrella that they can come under, and we can de-risk it with assistance from the insurance sector, for instance, and I think there's a big role in the work that we do to do more work with organizations like CRIF and other global insurance companies, and especially reinsurance companies who take a longer term view on risk mitigation and returns. So there's those aspects which I think are really important. And I think the key issue for me is that we need to change the conversation about return on investment. When you have the private sector looking for ROI, we are talking about extraction, and we cannot pursue the same methodology and expect a different outcome. To my mind, healthy ecosystems are a resilience tool to insulate our economy and our communities and our society from the impacts of a changing climate. We need to sell the work that we do more in terms of an insurance policy than a return on investment. Why does a company spend money on insurance? There's no ROI there, but they're de-risking their future from potential future losses. That's what healthy nature offers us. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in changing this conversation around putting nature onto the balance sheet, and also changing the conversation in terms of how we view an investment in nature for the de-risking that it offers us, rather than purely a return on investment. And there are certainly what Marfund is up to sounds very exciting, and what we need to see a lot more. Blue Forest Foundation in the Western United States also offers us a great example, and we're in conversation with those guys at the moment about replicating what they do in the Caribbean jurisdiction.
Right, thanks, James. Yeah, really exciting. Linda, so last but not least, I'll end with you for this round. And Linda, I'm really happy to see that you're from the circular economy sector. I think a sector, or maybe some of the terminology we haven't really heard a lot about as yet in the conference. So really exciting to hear from your end. But if you can help us maybe to understand first, what does FUSE do? What does FUSE Caribbean do? And if we can stick a little bit on that level of local, regional, but also public sector, what is the cooperation between FUSE and public sector on developing some of these projects that you guys have been involved in? So really happy to hear from you. Over to you, Linda.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm still a little bit in shock with all the numbers James just told us, like $7 trillion. So yeah, we're small, like scale-ups, a small enterprise, and we're working on plastic recycling. We want to show that we can do it, that plastic recycling in the Caribbean is possible, that on small islands or small countries, even like in Suriname, that we can do recycling. And so we started 5 years ago with the Great Plastic Bake Off. Our headquarters in the Netherlands started like developing a technology. So we do plastic recycling on LDPE, HDPE, and PP. So we don't want to do PET since it already has some, recycling methodologies in the region. And we started 3 years ago in Curaçao, one of the Dutch Caribbean. And nowadays we have a facility working in Curaçao. We're working in Barbados with a recycling company. And as well, we are working in Suriname. And we really hope to start soon with you guys in Dominica. So this is we're really happy that that we can show to people. Like I think this is the most important, that we know that if we talk about circular economy or solid waste management, it's a different sector compared to a lot of sectors because it's public and private based. So we know the governments have a responsibility to do waste collection and final disposal or recycling or treatment. But as well James said, like the governments are cash poor, so it's really difficult in the Caribbean region to do this. People are not used to paying utility fees or maybe a tipping fee, so it's government fund that needs to organize these activities. And at the same time, we see that some of the flows, like metals, e-waste, we see cans, sometimes PET bottles, carton, cardboard, that have recycling solutions. So with Fuse Caribbean, we want to show that as well for plastics, there is a solution. We can do it globally. We don't need huge countries. But yeah, for this, we need funding because, as we said, the governments are cash poor. They really need some help. I think what we really want to show, for example, with the waste authorities on Dominica, but as well with private recycling companies in Barbados, with Fernandez, a big producer in Suriname, we are working with all different kind of people that we all have the same interest. We all want to help the countries. We all want to see how we can tackle this plastic pollution. And if we work together and we design together these kind of projects, we can do it. We need economies of scale. So normally, yeah, we need like some kind of a region project, or maybe not the smallest islands. So maybe we can like sign MOUs with different kind of public partnerships, for example, with authorities. And at the same time, yeah, we want to, I think what we want to show is that we want to work with all of the different sectors. So we work with the public sector, we work with the private sector, but as well we work with the academic sector, with different kind of universities that can help us with data, with studies. We need to know where the plastic is. So there's different countries that have GIZ studies, reports that we can use, that we work on with universities. We work with NGOs, we work with civil society, we organize cleanups. So all together, we really want to show in the region that plastic can be translated into beautiful products. And I wanted to tell you one project that I'm really proud of that we're doing at the moment. We are working together with the prison in Curaçao. So the boards that we produce from the plastic waste from Curaçao, we make it into boards, and they make the boards into different kind of furniture. So we have benches, but as well we have waste bins. We have planters, and in the prison, the prisoners help us do this. So I think it's really nice as well to show that it's not only like an environmental project, but as well a social project.
All right, thank you so much, Linda. I see 2 questions, so I did promise that after the first round, we're going into the questions and see how we can have a little bit of an interaction with the audience. So I'll just go in the order. And I think, Amy, this is for you. I think you can also see it, but I'm happy to read it out loud. For Amy from Marfund, what has been the challenge to engage with private sector, and especially to get desensitization for environmental purposes? So Amy, over to you.
Thank you, Tanya. Great question. So basically, how we're working with the private sector so far, it's on one side with investors, and on the other with the companies. So luckily, so far with private investors, we've had most of them aligned with our mission, with our vision. So when they come to us wanting to fund, it's already sort of aligned with all of our criteria and processes, right? So it's impact funders. They're looking for that impact, and they might complain a little bit about a heavy process, but that's fine. On the other hand, working with some of the companies that come to us into our pipeline, and we identify that they have potential positive impact, sometimes it's a little bit not difficult, but challenging to collaborate. And I think it's really down to the nature of how private sector companies versus foundations or NGOs work. For example, we have a lot of different processes that we require the companies to go through. Just to mention maybe some examples, a lot of safeguards that we have, and we want the companies to acknowledge the safeguards and have risk mitigation measures in place. And so some of these things are a little bit challenging to impose, I would say. So we're really trying to find ways to make it work also for the companies, but not forget our main vision, right, in our mission, which is safeguarding the reef and the reef dependent communities. So we're trying to find that balance where we have them on board and aligned with all of the safeguards that we have. And as you said, sensitized to environmental issues and purposes. But at the same time, we don't want to make it too heavy for a company, because adding so many processes, so many indicators that our donors require for a company is going to scare them away. And so we have to, that has been, because we've been doing this now for 3 years. And at the beginning, that was one of the main things we were working on, is setting up this process, how to work as a conservation trust fund with companies who are looking to make an impact, but they're still maybe struggling to get on board, let's say, onto our side.
Thanks, Amy. I'll just add a little bit to that, because I really liked Linda's very practical idea, right? So they work together with a prison, and they make like furniture, which I assume, Linda, is being sold. But Amy, just maybe one practical project example that you have recently been implementing and involved with, or that you're actually now developing a special value chain or a special community that you would like to highlight here in this panel. And that blending indeed of private sector. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the main threats in the region for us is overfishing. And so we know that working with the fishing community is key. There's a lot of discussions about, it's difficult, it's risky. There's no interest from the fishing sector to work with conservation, for example, but really, they are some of the most important stakeholders and keepers of the reef. If they do it sustainably, it can be a great impact and a great collaboration, let's say, between the reef and the fishes. But if it's done unsustainably, well, it's just a vicious circle, right? And that's what we're seeing today, basically. So we're trying to find ways to work with fishers and support local fishers in this region. So we've started a project in Honduras, in the northern coast of Honduras, which is in the Mesoamerican Reef region. And the idea is to combine different components, I would say, to maybe provide funding to the fishing community, but also to make it more sustainable. So we've had a component of capacity building on sustainable practices, but also a training component on formalization of the fishers, because it remains a sector very informal, informal, I can say. For example, they don't have bank accounts, they're not writing down all of their sales, they're not tracking, a lot of them are not tracking. And so it's very difficult for the private sector to come in and develop these financial products that are fit for the financial market, right? So we had that project of capacity building, of training, and at the same time, with the data that we have found, trying to design a financial product specific for the fishing community so that they can access some financing. That financial product, we hope to include a parametric insurance. So I don't know if the audience is familiar with the parametric insurance, but it's basically based on an extreme climate event. So fishers might not be able to go and fish on specific days when there's a hurricane, which is quite frequent in our region. And so the insurance could compensate that loss if they're not able to go and fish. So that reassures the investor, right? Somebody who's putting money into that sector can say, oh, well, I know that my investment is being insured for the days that they're not able to go out and fish. So that, and combined with potentially the guarantee fund that I mentioned at the beginning. So all of these components come in together, and we're really trying to find a way to support those communities because they've been left out from the fancy financial products that are emerging, because it's quite difficult to work with them. It's quite remote, still risky, as I said, informal sector. So yes, I think the conservation trust funds, with this kind of catalytic funding, we're able to sort of be a little bit more bold and try these different things. And we hope that, you know, it can work in a pilot and we're able to scale and have more impact in the region.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. Yes, we're really looking forward also on how More Plus will develop. So I'll go to the next question. I think let me try this one to direct this one to James. James, the second question is, do you think it is equally important to reduce, redirect, or eliminate subsidies and or funding activities that harm biodiversity, and is as important to increase funding for the environment? So over to you, James. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. At the moment, the imbalance is so off the charts that it makes all of our efforts, frankly, you know, pitiful. But that's not our fault. The system is rigged against us right now, which is why things like TNFD, the Task Force for, I always forget what it stands for, Task Force for Nature-Related Disclosures, is so important. We need to help private sector companies even to understand the impact that they have before we, you know, we're not throwing rocks at them. We're looking to collaborate and partner with them to help them reduce their impact and hopefully divert some of their investments. So to give you an example, I think this is pertinent to this point. There's a huge role for the insurance sector to incentivize better behavior. We know that properties that invest in nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based adaptation can have less impact from climate-related events than those that don't. For instance, we have a case study from Anguilla in Ivan where two properties adjacent to each other had 14 million US difference in losses because one property had conserved the salt pond and the sand dunes and the reef and the other one hadn't. So at the moment, the insurance sector in the Caribbean sees no difference between two properties side by side. They pay the same rates. To my mind, that's not a market working effectively to incentivize change. We need a different approach, and which is why we're working with an organization, a big British insurance company called Howdens, who I need to give a big shout out to for being really innovative in this space, about the development of resilience insurance products. And those products would incentivize better behavior around the natural world. You would, if you own a resort within a watershed, if you were to invest money in restoring the forest in the upland area or restoring the mangrove or the reef, that could have a materially positive impact on your property in the event of a storm. However, there's no incentive economically for you to do that at the moment. The insurance sector now, with AI and all of the intelligence that we have, we can drill down to the level of an individual property and assess what their risk looks like and measure it over time. There are other organizations like Understory who do studies of drone and satellite imagery and can give you a year-by-year change of the individual species of plant growing on that land. So this allows us to actually develop insurance products that can say, yes, you've made 100,000 US investment in restoring your upland zone behind your property. Our risk modeling suggests that's a 15% reduction in flooding risk. We can give you a 10% reduction on your premium. And therefore, we are bringing an economic incentive into the model of bringing nature into the economy, which I think is absolutely essential. This is very nascent and early stage at the moment, but I believe critically that conservation and restoration of biodiversity has to be inserted into the wider economy if we have any chance of achieving our goals for truly sustainable and resilient small islands in the Caribbean. So I think I may have touched on the subject of the question, but the point is absolutely, we need to work together to help people to understand their impact and to divert their attention in a different way. One last example I will give. After Hurricane Ivan, we have the data from a single container shipped into St. Bart's from Miami after that storm had 80 alien invasive species in it. 80, not 80 individuals, 80 different species of alien invasive species. Alien invasive species have an impact of at least 10 to 15 billion dollars a year globally. And the Caribbean has some of the highest extinction rates and the highest levels of alien invasive species on the planet. If you help private sector, especially the tourism industry, understand the risks of importing alien invasive species and dealing with that at source in Port of Miami before it even gets down here, that's a project that I think could have a material impact on the sustainability of our environments by not importing those invasive species in the first place.
Just on, yeah, let me unmute. Thank you so much, James. Juana, I hope that responds to your question. If not, please feel free to add more questions in the Q&A. But I'll go to the next question, which is actually really a topic of importance and relevance now in the region, and it's sargassum. For those who are not familiar with sargassum, but I hope everyone is, that's what we call the seaweed that's now washing up on the Caribbean shores. It goes all the way towards Mexico, Belize, and Mesoamerica, and really impacting tourism and fisheries sectors. So the question for, I think, everyone who wants to chip in, but I'll start with Linda as the third panelist, is how do we put all this knowledge of you guys, and I guess in general, the knowledge of organizations, of experts, and what are some of your ideas to tackle the sargassum problem in the Caribbean? So Linda, I know it's not talking about circular or plastics, but please go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, or maybe it's not even funny, but we have been investigating to see if we can use it in our production process. So yeah, what we could. So I think this is something, if we talk about cooperation between the different sectors, it would be really nice if some of this $7 trillion, that maybe we could do some studies on how we could use sargassum and mix it with the plastics that we have, maybe even with glass, that we could use to produce the products that we are producing at the moment. So different pavers, tiles, boards. We know it's possible. And we even have talked to different universities in the Caribbean to see if we could do some studies. So yeah, maybe it seems like far away, but no, I think it would be really nice to do some. And I know there have been big events from European Union as well. In I think Grenada was last year, to see how we can use it. So yeah, we would be really happy to get a little small percentages of this 7 trillion to do research after this, how we could use it.
Thanks, Linda. Amy, is there any sargassum initiative, any ideas in the MAR Fund to tackle sargassum? Because you guys are also heavily hit by sargassum. Yeah.
Yes, this year in particular has been strong, let's say, at least in Mexico and Belize, from what I've seen. So as I mentioned, well, in the MAR Invest initiative, we mostly work with businesses or market initiatives, right? So we do have a couple of companies that are working with the collected sargassum. So sargassum, the fresh one, can, if collected in time, if it's not already starting its decomposing process, it can be upcycled. We call it upcycling into added value products. So it can be cosmetics, some kinds of materials to make like fake leather and these sorts of things. So we have a couple in our pipeline, mostly early stage, again, because it's sort of a and more newer problem, I would say. But we do have one of these larger companies that is already like one of the leaders, I believe, in the industry, and they're based in Mexico, so they're part of our pipeline. So that's good. That's regarding fresh collected sargassum, no? But we know that these are not solving the issue of sargassum, right? It helps. It's going to help the economy because it supports, the hotels getting off some of the sargassum off their beaches, so they can maintain their economy with having the tourists come in. And obviously it's better for the health of all the communities to have that sargassum removed, but that's not really the solution, right? The main problem is that there's so much sargassum generated and coming to our shores because of climate change and nutrient runoff and various things. It's quite a complex issue. So on top of having the businesses now working on the collection and upcycling, which is helpful, but we also understand that it's more than that, right? We know that collecting on the beach isn't that sustainable because potentially you're taking out too much sand from that collection process. Sand is very important. There's already a lot of erosion. So the idea is that hopefully maybe there's a process that can be collected offshore that would be less impactful for the beaches, especially if you have a turtle nesting region. But that collection out sea is also problematic. So there are a lot of different things that we need to study. Also in the upcycling process, the use of fresh water is quite high at the moment. So right now we're funding a study to support one of these companies sort of optimize the use of that fresh water, because it's not sustainable over time. If they're going to be collecting more and more sargassum, which is good, we don't want them to be using that much fresh water, right? So they want to understand how they can recycle the water in their factory so that they're not having such a big environmental impact in their process. So yes, there's a lot going on in sargassum. As I said, it's kind of a new field, at least for the economy. So still a lot to learn and figure out how it can be least impactful.
Yes, indeed. So James, I will ask you the same question of your thoughts about how do we tackle this sargassum in the Caribbean?
Yeah, thanks. This is a real pet area of interest for me for some years, and I've been noodling this problem for a long time. If you want to talk solutions, I was just at a Blue Economy event in Santa Cruz in California, pitching the idea of assisting the collapsing fishing fleets in West Africa who don't have any fish left to catch, to go out and catch sargassum instead, pivoting the Chinese distant water fleets away from trying to catch ever decreasing amounts of tuna and get them to get some of the $4 billion US a year that the Chinese government gives in fisheries subsidies towards catching sargassum where it's proliferating. The reason we have it in this region now is that in the winter of 2009-10, an anomalous weather event pushed it from its traditional zone 30 degrees north in the Sargasso Sea into the eastern tropical Atlantic, where it's met the perfect conditions to proliferate. If we want to deal with a pollution problem, it's best to go to point source and not try and deal with it downstream. At the moment, we're downstream. So big picture, at the global scale, to deal with sargassum, we need to catch a couple of million tons in the East Atlantic to stop it turning into what it is this year, 38.5 million tons once it reaches the Caribbean. 38.5 million tons is an industrial scale problem. This needs to be dealt with at a similarly industrial scale. My belief is that as a carbon sequestration tool, it's an incredible opportunity. The inorganic arsenic that it collects is also cleaning our oceans of the pollution derived from coal-fired power stations. That's where the arsenic comes from. Us burning coal has put arsenic into the atmosphere, which then rains down into the oceans that sargassum then accumulates. So we may have problems in places where we're growing sea moss that sargassum is coming into. When that sargassum decomposes, it starts leaching the arsenic back into the water in the beach. Where's that arsenic going? So we need to use it for something. My solution is, if you can see this, I'm not sure you can, is turning it into biochar. And biochar, pure carbon, can accumulate carbon credits. And it's also an amazingly productive soil amendment. It remediates pollution. All our water filters are made out of carbon, activated carbon. But also, after hundreds of years of extractive agriculture, we have very poor soils in our region. If we want to improve the health of our watersheds and make them more tolerant and resistant to drought and flooding, we need to start by restoring the soils. So let's turn sargassum into biochar, use it to accumulate the pollution from pig farms, chicken farms, human sewage outlets to inoculate it with biological activity, and then we can use it to restore degraded soils for both native fauna and restoration of forests, but also climate smart agriculture. And at the moment, I'm developing a pilot project here in St. Lucia with a private sector partner, a venture capitalist, to see if collecting the sargassum behind a barrier offshore, close to shore, sucking it off from behind the barrier with a dredge pump. So it's not got heavy equipment on the beach. It's not using boats out in the water. It's literally like a septic tank pump, sucking it to shore where it can be sucked 1,000 feet from the beach, totally away from the beach, and processed into biochar, bioplastic, emulsifiers, etc. But I think generally, as long as it's coming into the region, why don't we use it to restore our degraded terrestrial habitats and then help reduce the terrestrial sources of pollution, which are negatively impacting our coastal zones? I think sargassum is a huge opportunity. We just need to focus on a few pilot projects that prove a concept and then take it to scale.
Yeah, like the idea indeed, James. It shouldn't be a problem or just an issue, but really looking at how we can turn this into an opportunity. So the next question is from Rachel Ramsey, and that is for Linda. Linda, as a mission-driven MSME working at the intersection of waste, innovation, and community resilience, what do you see as the key motivators to drive small businesses like Fuse Caribbean to engage in environmental conservation? And what kinds of support or partnerships make it possible for organizations like yourself, MSMEs, to scale impact in this space? So over to you, Linda. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel, for the question. I think it's really interesting. So yeah, key motivators. I think for us, and I have to say, I'm not one of the founders of the company, but we discussed it a lot during the last couple of years. I think the key motivator is to have a triple impact and to show that you can have a triple impact on a sustainable way. I've been working for the last 16 years in Latin America, a long time in Colombia. And we see that a lot of projects start, a lot of small companies, SMEs, start with all the good intentions, but after a couple of years, they don't manage it. Or we have projects that are a pilot, but when the funding leaves, the project stops. And what we want to show is that if you have a positive business model, if you can make money in the waste sector with making beautiful products that you can sell to the end customer, you can have a sustainable model for a long term. And I think that is what we really are trying to connect to people. So we want to clean up. We want to make sure that plastics doesn't become marine litter, that it doesn't end up in a landfill, but that we can use it to make new products. And while doing this, we're creating new jobs. So as well explained, we have a couple of different facilities around the region, and at the same time, we as well making a social project. So we're working with the prisoners in Curacao, working with waste pickers, and going to work with waste pickers in Suriname. So we really want to make sure that it's not only about the environmental impact, but as well it has a social impact, but as well an economic impact. So in the end, if we can make a business of it, we can make sure it doesn't stop when the funding stops. And getting into the second part of the question, so what kind of support do you need? This is what we exactly need, is like the support to start up, to make sure that we get, for example, separation of plastics. Like we know that in the Caribbean, still it's not that common to have a separate waste collection. So we want to set up separate waste collection. So we make sure that the plastics come to our facilities and we can easily get it recycled into new products. Or that we can have campaigns, we can have stakeholder engagement. So we connect with the ministries, we connect with the universities, we connect with NGOs, with civil society. So this is what we really are looking funding for. And we see as an SME and becoming a scale up, that is $7 trillion. It's there for big companies. I think IFC doesn't even look at you if you ask for less than 20 million. But we don't need that much, but we really need this kind of money for the first step, for the first maybe 2-3 years, so we can build this recycling value chain. We can connect the collection, the transport, do separation, make sure that we create jobs, we do capacity building, and then we know that it will continue. So that's what we really, I think that's the most important for us to, sorry, the key motivators to bring people together and create jobs while cleaning up the environment.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Linda. Also for your call, at least to see, okay, this is really what we need as startups and enterprises. So going on to the next question is from Kathleen Mitikan. This one is for Amy. Amy, for the MAR Fund, what have been the challenges as a grant-making organization to enter that other side of the business, which is the lending and micro grant and micro loans, so the loan business? How has that been? And yeah, just your experience. Thanks.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, great question. So, well, for MAR Fund and for any other grant-making organization, making a loan is not part of our portfolio or possibilities, right? So through this initiative that we have is called MAR Invest, we're very lucky to have partners. So we've associated and created this alliance with partners to really bring in the expertise and other capacities that MAR Fund doesn't have. And so at the regional scale as well. So we're working with two organizations that are more towards the private sector. One is called New Ventures. They're based in Mexico, and they're really, let's say, an expert in the region in LATAM for accelerating businesses. So they can work directly with businesses. They have a mentorship program. And so they're really helping us identify some of these businesses and scale them to the next level. And then we hope to work with them to mobilize some private funding for them. And on the other hand, we also have another partner, which is called Wiwala. And they are also a fintech company that does do all that part of making loans, right? Disbursing loans and recollecting the funding. And they've been doing that also in social programs and environmental programs, and we are their program for the Mesoamerican Reef region. And so as I said at the beginning, the whole setting up of the initiative with the partners and how that worked in the operation, that was sort of challenging. We had to sort of understand how to frame it and under different agreements or MOUs. But now, yes, we've found the way is sort of some of the funding that we receive from our donor is dedicated to do concessional loans. And so that funding is passed along to our partner, Wiwala, which then is sort of the manager of that bucket of funding for the loans, right? So it is philanthropic funding, but it went through MAR Fund as the convening agent for the whole program. And then the private sector partner is handling that section. Then we work together because we are checking up on the environmental indicators, the social indicators, the safeguards. And so it's really a collaboration, but that partner remains let's say, the responsible of dispersing the loans and then getting the funding back from the companies.
Yeah, really interesting. Thanks. Thank you so much, Amy. I think, yes, for the startups of the conservation trust funds, we do really work only with grants so far, even for the CBF. And going into this space, that is indeed really interesting, and we really look forward to learning more from our fund on this and other conservation trust funds who have gone into the space of more the private sector and the loans. So I have the following question from Christina Smiskova. I will just open up the floor for anyone who would like to respond. But of course, I also mentioned that we can also type answers. So the panelists are happy to just go in and type your questions. So for Christina, thank you so much for your question. The question is, what is needed to really enhance the integration of the value of nature-based solutions in the financing systems, including insurances and funding? There is sufficient research on how nature-based solutions enhance property value and resilience, as well as ecosystem diversity and ecosystem services. So what is the next step? So it seems like, yes, she's saying we all have that the data is, well, not the data, but the research. So we know more or less what types of mechanisms, but what is really needed for the next steps. So who would like to go first?
I'm happy to throw a couple of points in. That's
James, please go ahead.
Don't know what happened to me there.
Oh. That happens if you
My
volunteer.
computer's decided to turn off my
To black
video.
out.
Maybe it doesn't like what I'm about to share. No, I think just because okay, look, let's approach this like our own health. We know that eating lots of vegetables and clean food is good for us, but do we still go eat KFC or McDonald's or buy processed food? Yes, of course we do. We need to be nudged and incentivized. We need to have an external incentivization to make us do the right thing sometimes. If you ask private sector people, would they like to invest in nature-based solutions and so on? Of course, they'd love to. But if they're a publicly listed company with shareholders they have to respond to, they can't justify getting a 1% return or a 2% return over 10 years rather than a 15% return in 2 years for a net nature negative investment. So ultimately, we're going to have to use our collaborative voices to demand global policy shift towards valuing nature for the ecosystem services that it offers us. We don't have an economy without nature. We don't have a society without nature. We've lasted too long existing with an economy that has nature as an externality on company balance sheets. So I come back to this point. Companies need to be legislated to report on their nature positive, nature negative impacts. And there are contingent liabilities that companies have. If you have a power plant that requires fresh water to cool it, and you live in a region that's struggling increasingly with drought, that's a contingent liability on the viability of your entire business. So what about if that power plant was to invest in afforestation and reforestation 100 miles away, 200 miles away in the uplands of that watercourse? How do we incentivize that? There are creative solutions for this, but we have to stop pretending that what we're doing at the moment is going to deliver sufficient change. It's not. All the metrics are going the wrong way. And you need to follow the money. The money is going in exactly the wrong direction. So we have to collaborate in doing this in a way that proves the point. I'll give you one last thing before I pass over. It was told to me recently by an investment banker from New York and London. He works across both jurisdictions, that he sits on a lot of boards. Those boards are now assessing philanthropic requests through AI before the board even gets to see them. That AI is written to understand if there's an economic rationale for why they should give the money. So we are not going to succeed by pulling on heartstrings. I thought 30 years ago, by developing ecotourism, people would fall in love with nature and the natural world and want to conserve it. I'm still naive enough to think that, but I'm old enough now to know that we need to also do something else. And we need to work collaboratively to make sure that the private sector is forced to report on its impacts on nature. And that can only be done at the highest levels internationally, but as the most tourism dependent region in the world and one of the most climate vulnerable regions in the world, this is the kind of message we should be sharing at the COPs, at the UN, etc. We must demand more from our policy makers internationally. We cannot do this alone. Thanks.
Yes, very clear, James. Thank you so much. I see Amy and Linda just, cannot wait to respond. But please, Linda, you first. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I will keep it. I totally agree with James. And although I'm a consultant and I've been working as a consultant for the last 10 years, I think we should stop doing or writing reports. Let's get into action. And I think that, I don't know, well, Tanya, you're from Suriname. I think we have zillion reports on the solid waste management situation in Suriname. In Colombia, it's the same. We know what we have to do, but we like making or writing new reports because, I don't know, we're afraid of getting into action. And I think that's what we need. We just keep it simple. Start if you want to do, for example, a deposit system. You don't have to invest in everything and do an entire investment like a deposit system as we have in Europe, but just start with PET bottles or start with cans and learn from a first step, learn from it, keep it simple, and like make mistakes and take a next step. But just start doing it, and I think trial and error, no? But we really stop writing reports, and I think that's most of the money that we at the moment. I don't know, Amy and James, with you, but like the organizations I work with, the bilateral, multilateral organizations, it's all consultants spending money on writing reports that nobody's going to read because nobody wants to read a report like more than 100 pages. And it's all the same conclusions that we already know. So yeah, for me, it would say like, let's get into action and help SMEs or scale up companies that want to show, and the entrepreneurs that want to take this first step. So that's what would be my suggestion.
Yeah, just maybe very short, Linda, just to add on that. And before I go over to Amy on the same topic is, and I'm blending the next question is, so for you as an organization and a startup enterprise, do you see it difficult to get funding? Is it easy to get funding? And then again, once you get the grant, because that's the next question indeed, how easy do you see your own experience to leverage that to get more funding, larger, I would say, investments, whether it's from government, I think, or from other investments. So how do you see that in this space, working and looking for grants and getting the funding that you need to start? Oh, it's really, okay. Please, if you want to elaborate on that one.
No, it's as I said, like I think most of the big like bilateral or multilateral organizations look for millions. If they work like they do only a research or they want to report and see like big studies or big like pre-feasibility, feasibility, or investments of 10 million, 20 million. And if we talk about Fuse Caribbean and the Great Plastic Bake-Off, we have small facilities because we work at small islands. So we really need money to set up, to work with the government, to do capacity building. It's really practical. And I think that's the difficult part, that people expect you to ask for 4, 5, 6 million. Even the Dutch government or other governments, they're not interested in somebody that would ask for maybe less than 1 million. So I think it's really funny that we need like a little bit of money, but it's even more difficult to get the money. So yeah, no, it's really difficult. And we are really happy that we can show that it works in Curaçao. We are selling our products at one of the biggest retailers of the Dutch Caribbean. We are working in Barbados and selling it over there. We work with Beast Recycling, which is one of the biggest recyclers in the Caribbean. So now we can tell people, look, there's the facility. If you want, you can visit us. You can see what we are doing, because I think this is really necessary. And that will maybe help us to get to a next step and get bigger and have regional projects. But yeah, it's getting from an SME to a scale up. It's not easy.
Yeah, no, really nice. I guess before I hand over to Amy on this topic, James, you wanted to quickly
I just wanted to very quickly jump in and say what Linda was saying about reports, and also just to say, yes, absolutely, no more reports. But why do the reports need to be written? As far as I know, this is a responsibility and a de-risking for blame for the donor to be able to say they've got plenty of evidence that the money was well spent. What I think we need to do is to work more like the private sector in how we match people, match the money to the project. And one of the things I was working on when I was in California last week is learning from how Silicon Valley took ideas and concepts like Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, all of these huge platforms now, and turned them into multi-billion-dollar industries. They did it through incubators. They matched the people with the idea with the people with the money, and the people with the money worked collaboratively. They tore the whole thing apart, put it back together again in an accelerator, incubator methodology, where everyone who was involved in it got to see what was going to happen. And that helps build confidence, it helps build trust, and it helps build a better product. And I think if we were to do that and work in that way, rather than this traditional methodology of grant, think about the waste of human resources when you put out a call for grants, the months that small people put together to put an application in. Then the donor has to assess hundreds of applications. it's crazy. The private sector would never work like that. We have to start operating differently. And I think this partnership with the private sector to start understanding, start speaking the same language. We don't speak the same language. We've got to start translating so both parties understand the needs. That happens when we work together in the same place. It doesn't have to be long, intensive, but we have to get on the same page. And I think it would be well worth our while collaborating in a way to bring the money and the projects together in an incubator accelerator program where we can take these things to scale and replicate what Silicon Valley has done so successfully.
Thanks so much, James. And that is actually a great entry point for Amy, because I think More Plus Invest is indeed that incubator and accelerator space. So Amy, please just explain us a little bit on how that could work. And again, putting some of these questions, into that perspective. But again, as a conservation trust fund, I think the More Plus Invest is indeed a great program where indeed what James was saying is, I think that is exactly what you're trying to do. So please go ahead, Amy.
Yes, and it also relates to some of the pain points I was mentioning at the beginning, like how does a trust fund work with the private sector? And indeed, we speak different languages, we have different operations, and so it takes quite some effort and some time just to get aligned on all these things. And I think both need to adapt a little bit what they're doing. Like the private sector needs to be a bit more strict in some things. They need to acquire some additional processes that might be a bit lengthy and difficult for them. And on the other hand, for us, it's being maybe a bit more flexible and some of these documents may be a bit less lengthy, etc. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do. It's still an ongoing process. Obviously, we have some way to go as well. But I think really when you find the right partners for your region, for your focus, then you can really find these great collaborations and complement each other. So the trust fund can take on a role, the private sector partners can take on another, but as long as you've got that mission and agree on the way forward, then I think you can achieve great things. And I also wanted to add on the original question, I think maybe just one example, and I think it also something that James mentioned at the very beginning, there's these lack of incentives. And we have seen that in the region, even if we have some different types of funding, we have some opportunities to help develop the blue economy sector in our region, we're still seeing some gaps, some barriers, and a lot of it is related to policy. And so just this year, we've just started, we initiated a cohort with some, we call them leaders because they're part of a leadership program, but some individuals that are working close to the policymakers and that have identified a barrier that they can come up with a proposal to try and address some of these barriers for mobilizing private funding to the region in conservation. And so that's sort of a mentorship, a leadership program to help them strengthen these proposals that are relevant for our region. And maybe just one example is related to the wastewater treatment in the region. So this is one of the biggest threats, as I've mentioned. And even though the law is quite good, the environmental law is quite strong, the enforcement of the law is poor. And so that's really the gap that we're seeing. A lot of companies, hotels, restaurants, even though they say they're sustainable, they want to be sustainable, there's no one checking on their water quality. Or if somebody comes maybe once every, I don't know how, 2 years, the fine is so low. It's quite ridiculous. So there's not that incentive for them to actually invest in the proper infrastructure. Then if you also look at the municipalities, there's a lot of outdated infrastructures because the region is growing quite rapidly and there's sort of mass tourism. So different things combined is leading to increasingly, this threat that is increasing, right? The lack of wastewater treatment or appropriate wastewater treatment. And so one of our solutions for now, until we can maybe work on the policy, which is more long-term, right? We know that takes time, is indeed working as impact investors. So we would say to a hotel maybe or a restaurant, we're giving you a loan so you can update your wastewater treatment, either infrastructure or process, right? And we're giving you a loan at a better rate, a better interest, more interesting for you, because we want you to provide some of the metrics that we're interested, right? We want you to measure the volume that you're treating every month. We want you to measure what's coming out and share that with us. And that's sort of, well, we're just starting with this. It's from this year. But that's a way that we have found with private money, private capital, that we can try to push this industry that is polluting in the right direction that we want, until there's an improvement in the regulatory framework or policies or whatever it will be, but fingers crossed.
No, thank you so much. I think, yes, I think it links back to what James was saying, right? We need those incentives. Whether it would come from a donor like yourself, because you are the donor to the enterprises, whether it would come from government, which we takes a little bit longer to change policies if policies need to be changed, but it is about the incentives. How do we drive nature-based solutions in a way that it's not only about, you know, the cute sea turtle picture that we post on our social media, James, right? To say, listen, can you please help us? Because we really need the sea turtles. And yes, some people, you know, feel connected to those types of messages and some people don't. And if they don't, we do need to drive that incentive and see how that's going. So I know that we do have officially until 3:30, but I would like to wrap up. But I do see James, his hand, because we have closing remarks and we just want to get some other household, I would say, messages out and really thank everyone. But let me just give the last word first to James now, and maybe just a quick round with just James, Linda, and Amy. What would be your last words to leave the audience with after this session, after these 2 days, actually, because this is the last panel. So James.
Thanks,
1
Tanya.
minute.
I would like to say that obviously I've sounded very negative. However, I am at heart an optimist, and I'm having just come back from California and being around Santa Cruz and Monterey. You can see a bay that was completely ecologically destroyed through the sea otter fur trade and the whaling and the sardines and anchovies. So 100 years ago, that bay was an ecological disaster. It is now an absolute abundance of wildlife through the initial investment in 2 small marine protected areas at the southern end of the bay that then spread. When the sea otters collapsed, the kelp collapsed because the sea urchins grew out of all proportion to eat it. Once the sea otters were allowed to come back, the entire biodiversity came back. So we can make change when nature is given a chance. And I think we just need to never lose sight of the fact we just need to get out of the way and let nature take its course and help nudge it through changing our behavior collectively. But we can make a difference. I don't want people to feel that I'm sitting here thinking there's nothing that can be done. There's huge things to be done. We just need to do it in a collaborative and effective way. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, James. Linda first for your closing remarks.
Yeah, I think I'm optimistic as well. I think there are like people like us that want to help nature, that think that nature is so important in every sector that I've been working with. And I think that's for us, Fuse Caribbean, the Great Plastic Bake Off. That's what we want to show, that we can work together, that as a public sector, private sector, academic, social society, that together we can do it. But keep it simple. Just start doing it. I think that's the most important. And if you want to be part of our a big event, or just let us know, and we're really happy to receive you at one of the facilities in Curacao or in Barbados or in Suriname. And really hopefully soon we'll be opening up as well with you guys in Dominica. So really thanks for everybody for all the nice information and nice discussion that we had. So hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Linda. Amy, I'll end with you for closing remarks.
Thanks. Thank you, Tanya. I agree. I know sometimes it can be quite depressing when we see everything that's going on in the world, but really I am sometimes, as I mentioned, we have a program where we support small scale businesses looking to have positive impact. But I am really amazed sometimes by the people that we find and really dedicated to make a change, a positive change for a specific ecosystem or a region or communities. And so this really gives me hope. And working with all these other organizations from different places, really, we can see that we're facing the same issues. Everybody has the same drive. And this is really, I think, what we need to keep doing, sharing experiences and growing as a sector. And also, well, for any other conservation trust funds out there listening today, I would just maybe recommend don't be afraid to try new things, be bold. It might seem scary because, you know, sometimes we have our hand ties on what we have to be doing, but I think we're kind of lacking time to be just not trying things out. So we really need to be pushing some of these things forward and yeah, more quickly than we would hope.
All right, thank you, Amy. And with that, I think I would like to thank everyone so much, James, again, Linda and Amy, to be part of the panel. I would like to thank the audience for the engaging questions. Of course, you have the names here. I think we're all on social media right now, so you can connect. There are resources I have to add. If you go into the Zoom link below, you can click on resources. The Zoom recording will be available. But of course, if you would like to connect with any one of us, please do reach out. If you do not have the emails or if you don't know how to reach out, you can always reach out to CPF and we can connect you to one of the panelists. But thank you so much to the panelists for having, you know, for inspiring us. James, it wasn't all sober and negative, but there is hope. If I listen to all of you three, there is still hope. We're all working towards trying to move the needle into the right place. So thank you so much for this. And with that, I will hand over to Karen for some closing remarks of the day and of the conference. Thank you again.
Tanya.
Over to you, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you all. And I could not think of a better final panel to really wrap up the last 2 days. As Tanya said, James, it's not negative, it's a reality. We have these discussions in these panels so that we can take to the donors exactly what's happening on the ground and with partners. And certainly one of the roles of conservation trust funds, as we see it, is to really make sure that the donors understand what's really needed in making a difference on the ground in the countries we are working in across the globe where conservation trust funds work. And we take that job very seriously. So we are always making sure that it's not just said on the microphone, but happening in real time. And I think the last 2 days have been an amazing discussion of some of those issues, starting, I think, yesterday with really a discussion of what's happening, what's already happening on the ground, what has worked, some of where we want to go going forward, particularly with conservation trust funds and small island developing states. And we moved today into a lot of what's possible, but also with a Caribbean context. My most famous adjective is Caribbeanizing, or maybe it's a verb, Caribbeanizing what we're doing to make sure it makes sense for us in the region. And really, we spend time as CBF and with our partners driving home what makes sense for the Caribbean region. And I think the panels that we had today that discussed climate financing, the debt swaps that we've done, the older ones, like the one in Belize, and the newer one, like the one in the Bahamas, and the ideas for climate financing, which are still very nascent, and we have to figure out how it works in our small island context. The idea of bringing blue carbon to those discussions and blue economy discussions really came through today. So I'm really, really pleased with the discussion, and of course, ending with this panel that really thought through what makes sense for the Caribbean region. And the CBF is very involved with all of those partners. And as I said, we'll continue to strive towards making sure that those conservation outcomes and conservation challenges are clear, and that we are doing our part in coordinating what needs to happen for Caribbean responses. So very quickly, as we come to the close of the 2025 Caribbean Conservation Finance Congress, I'm filled with a sense of profound gratitude and a renewed commitment to the shared vision that has brought us all together over these 2 incredible days. The theme of this congress, was Conservation Outcomes Through Regional Action and Leverage, or CORAL. And it has been more than a title, it has been a guiding principle. We have not just discussed conservation, but the practical, financial, and collaborative ways to achieve it. First and foremost, I would like to extend our deepest gratitude to our expert moderators and panelists. Your thought-provoking presentations and your honest engagement with our audience have illuminated new pathways and challenged our assumptions. Thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, and your passion. To our interpreters from RIV Eventos, a heartfelt thank you. Your work has been vital to the inclusive and collaborative spirit of this Congress. We're also deeply indebted to the CBF board, CBF partners, and our sponsors who have been with us throughout and helped us to open the event. Your belief in our mission has been instrumental in making this Congress a reality. And last but by no means least, a special thank you goes to the tireless efforts of our organized committee, our longtime partners at Island Innovation, particularly James, Christian, and Jerome, and the most outstanding CBF team led by Renee Smith, David Jenkins, and Ashige Cowell in the background. This event would not have been possible without your countless hours of hard work, your meticulous planning. You have been the engine that powered this Congress, and we're deeply grateful for your efforts. Over these 2 days, we have woven a rich tapestry of ideas. We have explored innovative financing mechanisms from debt for nature swaps to blue bonds. We have discussed the critical role of public-private partnerships and the importance of leveraging regional cooperation to multiply our impact. The discussions have shown us that conservation is not a solitary pursuit. It is a collaborative endeavor. It requires us to move beyond our individual organizations and our national borders. It demands that we leverage our collective strengths, share our successes, and learn from our setbacks. I'm confident that the seeds planted at this Congress will blossom into impactful collaborations. The journey is long, but our resolve is strong. Let us leave here renewed with a sense of purpose and a shared commitment to the future of our Caribbean. Thank you all again for being with us. We look forward to any feedback that you have. There will be some surveys to go with, but as Tanya mentioned, please contact the CBF for any ideas, thoughts that you would like to follow up from the discussions that you've heard over the last 2 days. We're happy to end the Congress, and thank you all so much for your keen participation.